All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ben Dupuy, and I'm a member of the BGR Board of Directors and Chair of the Breakfast Briefing Committee. And I'm pleased to welcome you to BGR's Breakfast Briefing, sponsored by First Horizon. Our New Orleans area market president is Tony Adams. Where's Tony? Tony's right in the back. Thank you, Tony. First Horizon has been in this community on the North Shore for 20 years. We're a full-service banking offering. We've got 3 branch offices, provide commercial banking and investment advisory services, and let us know what we can do to help you. So I want to extend our gratitude to WWNO New Orleans Public Radio, which will rebroadcast this event on Tuesday, June 27th at 9 p.m. We hope you'll take advantage of the question and answer portion of today's program. We've provided instructions for submitting questions using the QR code to access the online Q&A form. The QR code will be up on the screen during the Q&A portion, and you've also been given paper instructions. However, if you prefer to write your question, please hand it to a BGR staff member and include your name if you want to be identified. There'll also be a QR code you can access to complete an online survey following the program. Again, we'll show you that code on your screen, or you may refer to your instructions. The best way to stay on top of all BGR events and research is to become a member. BGR is a private, nonprofit, independent research organization dedicated to informed policymaking and the effective use of public resources for the improvement of government in the New Orleans metropolitan area. We regularly engage with our members about our public policy work. BGR values this dialogue, and we appreciate our members' support in amplifying BGR's good government recommendations. If you're not currently a member, visit bgr.org and consider joining the ranks of empowered citizens working to improve local government. We also encourage you to follow BGR on social media. And now to introduce our topic this morning is Becky Mowbray, BGR's President and CEO.
Thanks, Ben. Whoops. All right. Thank you again for being here. Oops. Is this on? Yes. Okay. I'd like to express our gratitude to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship of BGR's Breakfast Briefing series again this year. Your support allows BGR to make these events free to the public. And I would also like to thank Hornbeck Offshore Services for hosting us this morning. We really appreciate it. It is wonderful to see everyone today. My name is Becky Mowbray, and I have served as BGR's president and CEO since January of last year. BGR's research reports identify solutions to some of the most complex and significant challenges facing local government in St. Tammany, Jefferson, and Orleans parishes. Our most recent report, which was published just last month, examined the complicated governance structure of the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board and provided reform options for long-term improvement. In the coming months, we will also be releasing ballot reports to help voters make informed policy decisions at the polls. BGR's breakfast briefings further our mission by allowing citizens to hear directly from officials and experts on vital public policy issues. We have 2 remaining breakfast briefings this year. If you are unable to attend these briefings, or if you missed the first one, you can visit bgr.org to watch video replays of them. And now for today's topic. St. Tammany's continual population growth over the years has raised a number of questions. How can the parish's infrastructure keep up? What impacts does the growth have on zoning throughout the parish? And the questions we are considering today, is the parish government, and more specifically, the parish council, structured in a way to best serve a growing constituency? With 14 members elected from single-member districts, St. Tammany has the largest council among the state's most populous parishes. It is twice the size of the councils of Jefferson Parish and New Orleans, each of which have 5 single-member districts and 2 at-large members. BGR currently has no position on changing the size of the St. Tammany Parish Council. Our goal for today's discussion is to help the public and policymakers learn more about the issues and potential effects a restructured council could have on the overall performance of parish government. Here to discuss these issues are, and you guys can come up as I introduce you. Actually, it'll take just a sec. We'll just list you up front. Mike Lorino, St. Tammany Parish Councilman for District 4. Kevin Davis, former president of the St. Tammany Parish, and Bill Aaron, the managing shareholder of Aaron and Gianna PLC, and an expert in parish charter issues. Okay, start coming up. Mike has held the District 4 council seat for St. Tammany Parish since 2016, which includes the city of Madisonville and a portion of Mandeville. He recently advanced the idea of reducing the size of the council. Mike has always called Louisiana home, growing up in St. Bernard Parish, graduating from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and training as an apprentice with the Associated Branch Pilots of the at the Port of New Orleans, which led to a long and distinguished career as a state commission bar pilot. Mike has also held various leadership positions within the Greater New Orleans Expressway Commission, the Louisiana River Pilots Association, and the Maritime Pilots Association. Kevin was a member of the commission that created the parish charter that went into effect in 2000. He then was elected 3 times as parish president, serving from 2000 to 2011. In this role, he led St. Tammany's emergency response and rebuilding efforts to Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Gustav. During his tenure, Kevin created the Parish Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness and the first Emergency Operations Center, as well as the first emergency response plan and the first social media-based emergency information system. Prior to being elected parish president, Kevin served as a St. Tammany Parish police juror for 12 years. Today, he manages his own consultancy firm and provides consulting to governments and private companies for federal funding options. Bill is the managing shareholder of the New Orleans law firm Aaron and Gianna, where he concentrates on commercial litigation, state and local government, banking and trusts, real estate, insurance coverage, and general business. He has extensive experience in state and local government, including serving as city attorney for New Orleans, special prosecutor for the New Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, special counsel to the New Orleans City Council, legal advisor to the Jefferson Parish Charter Advisory Board, highly relevant to today's discussion, and special counsel for the Louisiana Commissioner of Insurance, to name just a few of Bill's many roles. Bill graduated from Loyola University College of Law and currently serves as an adjunct professor of law at the LSU Law Center. During the presentation, I will be asking specific questions of our panelists, and after they finish, I will also be moderating an audience Q&A. I'm sure we will have many questions from this thought-provoking discussion. And as Ben mentioned, there will be a QR code that will be shown on the screen, and you can access the online Q&A form using that code. Or you can just refer to the instructions you were provided with at the beginning of the program, and you're welcome to write anything down on paper and just hand it to a BGR staff member. I will note that the views expressed in this program are those of our speakers. Please join me in welcoming Kevin, Mike, and Bill. Thank you. Mike, let's begin with you since you started this discussion back in January. Take us briefly through your personal journey to the conclusion that St. Tammany would be better served by a smaller parish council. And besides having fewer members, please explain how the council you envision would differ from the council currently laid out in the parish charter.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to BGR for taking this initiative. But If you don't mind, I can answer pretty much all those questions if I just read this little statement.
Go right ahead.
And
that
you hit
great.
it right on the head. St. Tammany Parish converted from police jury to council January 2000. The vote was taken in 1998 and passed by a very narrow margin, 121 votes, almost 24,000 people voted. The U.S. Census data in 2000, population of St. Tammany was 191,000. 2020, it's 264. Increase of 73,302 people, 38.3% over 20 years, and most importantly, continuing to grow. Although population growth is not equal across the parish districts, this is almost a 40% average workload increase for council reps since the last time any changes were made to the council structure. Population growth normally comes to development concerns, more projects to stay ahead of, and more issues and concerns for residents that need to be addressed. We have all of that, as you mentioned earlier. Growth, it is my opinion, St. Tammany has reached a population level of density that would be better served by a smaller body of full-time council members. St. Tammany is the fourth largest parish, as you mentioned. Some of the reasons: transitioning to a full council representative would ensure the citizens have access to their council representatives during regular hours. All council reps to make parish work their primary focus. That's very important. Promote cooperation and ongoing collaboration between the council and administration. That is vitally important. Allow more and better communication between council and state elected officials. Each council member that has a full-time job must focus primarily on the money that they need to raise their families. Concerns if no changes are made. Quality of life is important for council reps also. They will be unable to maintain the status quo, continued population, and without changes. We may be left with council seats that no one wants to fill or ineffective leadership due to lack of appropriate candidates willing to run. Some potential great candidates may already be unwilling to run because they don't want to commit to a second job. Some employees do not allow candidates to run. That's happened a couple of times. Communication and cooperation between the council and parish administration is already in a state of affairs, and it seems clear that continuing under the structure that we currently exist will contribute to further deterioration of that relationship. Number and salary. I do not have an opinion on how many council members should be on a full-time council. I do not have any comment on proposed salary. I personally think an independent study would be needed to determine those issues. By the time this effort could potentially come full circle, I will no longer be eligible to run for the council. Ultimately, the residents of St. Tammany should vote on this very important issue. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mike. Now let's pivot and understand how St. Tammany arrived at its current parish council and government structure. Kevin, could you provide us with some history and context on the parish's home rule charter and form of government? What was the thinking back in the late 1990s when the charter was being drafted behind having a 14-member council?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Becky and BGR. Thank you all. Good morning. I'll take you back in time. It was in the 1980s. And I don't know how many were here and living in St. Tammany at the time, but we tried a charter form of government in 1980. It actually didn't even last 4 years. We came out of a police jury that people felt like, hey, this police jury really is not working. And if you remember, during the 80s, police jury, the parish government had zero funds. They basically, there was no 2-cent sales tax. There was very little in permit fees or general budget that they had. So they really couldn't do a lot. So the public said, let's vote this government out and put in a charter form of government with a parish president. It didn't last 4 years. So we went back to a police jury form of government. In 1988, I was elected. And I served 12 years as a police juror. And in that discussion, we thought with the increase of population, maybe we should look at going back to that form. But everybody was very nervous because a lot of people asked me, how did you get to 14? It wasn't rocket science. It was 14 police jurors. So we all knew, and I was on a charter commission, we all knew to get this thing passed, we better put 14 on. Now, we had a lot of discussion of it. Some of you may have been in those discussions back in I guess it was 99 when we had the commission. And we had a lot of discussions about a lot of issues. If you notice, this charter puts a lot of power in the parish president's position. You'll hear maybe Bill talk about other charters, but this one gives the parish president a lot of powers. So in 2000, I was a police juror. We got off the charter and we said, well, let's put it to the vote of the people. And as Mike just said, I think it was 121 votes. I wasn't too excited about it. I was a police juror. I represented the city of Slidell. I was pretty happy. My constituents were happy. I went to every homeowners meeting. We got our signs up, our roads done, our ditches. But remember, there wasn't a lot of growth still then. I mean, it was growing, but not like we see today. So I just kind of make that statement. So, but then as we got finished, we were going to the vote, I went back to my constituents and said, you know what, we really do need somebody to have one voice for this parish. Because I can tell you, under a police jury form, there was many times the vote was 8-4. Is that right? No, it was 8-6, I guess. And what would happen is it passed, because the old comments then, some of you are my age, remember this, with 8 votes you can do anything you want. That was kind of the known statement. So we'd pass something with 8 votes. Let's say we went to the legislature asking for some funding on a project. Well, the other 6 would go to Baton Rouge and say, no, we don't want that. So it'd be a real confusing situation. So with that, everybody said, no, we need to make the parish president very strong so that he or she could do the wishes of the people of St. Tammany. And again, that's how we end up where we are today. I think it's done, and we were all very cautious, because remember, it failed once. So the colleagues, all of us on the commission, were very nervous about, we really want this to work. So I think the positive was, I fortunately was elected from a police juror to the parish president, and had that knowledge when I came into the office, and knew what they were experiencing, because I had experienced it as a police juror before they became council members. So that kind of gives you what took place over a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So now that we've looked at the past, present, and future, let's turn to Bill for the practical. Bill, if the public showed interest in reducing the size of the parish council, what would need to happen, and what are some of the key details and questions that would need to be answered in any such shift?
Okay, the first thing is that in order to change the size of the council, you'd have to amend the charter, which would require a vote of the people. One of the interesting things is that there's an election coming up soon, and if people are reelected, you can't reduce their term or their compensation during 4 years. So if you do this after their election, you can't basically do the change for another 4 years.
Can you hold? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's one issue, the timing of all of this. The other situation is this, is if you move from 14 to 7, you have a reapportionment or a redistricting issue. As I understand it right now, District 14 is the only minority-majority district. So the question is, if you double the size of the districts, what would happen to minority representation on the council? All right. The other situation is that if you go to full-time, the question becomes, what do you do about staffing? Full-time council members are going to want their own staff. Right now, my understanding is that there's a central staff with 3 or 4 people who serve all the members of the council. So it becomes a funding issue. How do you fund staffs for all the individual council members, and do you increase the size of the central staff? And if you look to parishes such as Orleans and Jefferson, which have full-time council members, the staffs are pretty large. At the individual level, they're also large in terms of the central staff. charter itself provides, as was said, for a strong parish president. Jefferson Parish is just the opposite. Jefferson Parish has a parish president, but for want of a better expression, a weak parish president, a strong parish council. In Jefferson Parish, contracts, for example, are signed not by the parish president, they're signed by the council. Let me repeat that. They're signed by the council. Some say it provides a more effective system. It's something that I think the voters, might want to take a look at. The other thing is, right now, all of the council members are single district members. There are no at-large members. So the question is, do you want to go like Orleans or Jefferson that has 2 at-large and 5 district, or do you want to have all district council members? That's another consideration. Jefferson Parish is St. Tammany is pretty spread out from the standpoint of urban and rural. So you have different interests that want to be represented, and so if you contract the districts into a smaller number, how do you make sure that all of the relevant constituencies still feel that they're represented? One of the things that caught my attention in the charter, and Jefferson Parish avoided, is who provides legal representation to the parish. The current charter provides for a legal department, but the legal department is staffed by the DA's office. And I think if you've been watching the news over here in St. Tammany, that there's some issues there. So one of the things when you move to full-time council members, there may be an interest in having a legal department actually employed by the parish. Then again, that's another cost. One of the things that has happened in St. Tammany Parish is not just the growth, but you've got more money now. When it was a police jury situation, you didn't have very much funding, and so one of the reasons why it was decided to have the DA provide legal representation, it was cheaper to do it that way. So from a funding standpoint, you may decide that, it's a different, you want to take a different approach to something like that. That's basically, in a nutshell, in 5 minutes, some of the issues I think you'd have to deal with.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. So let's dig a little deeper into some of the key questions surrounding council consolidation with all of our panelists. So if pursuing council consolidation, how should the parish determine the right size and composition of a smaller council? And who does this work? The administration, a committee, a consultant? How does it work?
Normally you'd have a charter commission, and so the commission would be representative of the parish. Different organizations would probably nominate people to be a part of the commission, and they would put together recommendations, which if they reach a consensus, those recommendations would then go to the voters.
Well, I mean, I agree. That's yes. I think only comment I would make is on, remember, you kind of look at history to see how we got here, even with the legal counsel. Remember what I told you, first off, the police jury had no money, so there was 14 of us, and not having a lot of money, we didn't want to burden the general fund with hiring legal counsel. So it was easier back then to have the DA represent us. But I think today, I certainly would agree that, and there was a lot of discussion of that. Let me tell you, we spent days discussing the legal counsel, but it got down to dollars and cents.
Rebecca, that's a very important point. That it's very important that we start this issue now, as Bill said. It takes time, and it will take at least 4 years. But I really believe it needs to be looked at by a professional group in the beginning that does this. There's professionals out there that's their specialty, and they need to do that and take the politics out of it in the very beginning and have a nice document to work off of. Yes, ma'am.
If I may, if I'm not mistaken, anybody else in the room, I was trying to refresh my memory, but when we wrote this, I'm pretty sure you have to create a commission. So the council itself can't make the decisions, so the dialogue would start with that commission through public meetings, and all kinds of things would then be open for discussion of changes or improvement, the like.
Terrific. So a smaller council would mean fewer council districts. So what challenges would redistricting present, and how could these challenges be effectively addressed? And I would ask if for each of our speakers to hold the microphone as close as possible so everybody out here can hear.
Well, in my prior profession, I was involved when the legislature went to redistricting and to changing the concept. It's very important that you try to do this and maintain the continuity of the government that you have. So, as Bill said, I think it needs to be done well after an election to where everybody can just concentrate on what they need to do. We would have to forget about the politics, forget about who's who and who's what, but go right to what is the best representation of for the people. And it might have me running against Bill, it might have me running against Kevin, but unfortunately, but anyway, but that may take some time, but it has to happen. That's just the makeup of where we are today. And I think the smaller districts, if you have a full-time, will have more representation than part-time.
On the subject of redistricting, usually what happens is when areas are redistricted, somebody's not happy, and there's usually litigation afterwards. I recently represented the Jefferson Business Council that was opposed to expanding the size of the Jefferson Parish School Board from 9 to 11, so they were going the opposite way. The idea in Jefferson was there was a large Hispanic population, so there was some interest in creating a district serving a Hispanic population. There are currently 2 African Americans on the Jefferson Parish School Board, so it was a desire to create a 3rd district. We looked at it, and one of the problems is that in order to create a district, it has to be contiguous, which means that it has to be connected. So you can't jump here, jump there, whatever. It has to go like in a straight line. Or it could be a jagged line, but it has to all be connected and contiguous. The problem was because of the residential patterns of the Hispanic community, you couldn't draw a district. It just was impossible to do that. In terms of the African American district, you could draw a 3rd district, but you would reduce the percentage of African Americans in the other 2. And so there was a possibility that you have 3 on paper and end up not having 3 representatives on. So it was decided by a vote of the school board not to move in that direction. But here you have an interesting issue in St. Tammany because there is 1 minority district. Normally you have to get government approval in terms of redistricting, et cetera, and it's a process. The problem, as I see it, is that you have 14 districts, 1 minority. If you move to 7, will you lose the ability to have that 1 minority, and will that engender some litigation, because of that? Or is there some kind of way to address that issue? But I think it will effectively be an issue because if you go to 7, the 7 are going to be twice as large as the 14. And so that's the problem that you're going to have from a redistricting standpoint.
Yes, I would ask you to look at that map. One of our big concerns when we did the charter forum and had 14, remember there were 14 police jurors, so we were in that. But there was a lot of discussion as I look at that map, and Bill is exactly right. Number 1 was our minority district, which is down in Slidell. And I know you can't see the map real well, but it's a real strange district. We had to kind of cross a road and get onto one side of the area to the other to make it work. My concern is, I'm open to all of the discussion, and I'd love to continue this in the future. What do we do about the minority district, and what do we do about our rural constituents? Does anybody live in the Folsom, Goodby, any of those areas over in 5th Ward, 6th Ward? Because here's my concern. You got 7 right there. There's 14. Now let's make it 7. Let's all of us here acknowledge that. Well, it's probably going to look like this or like this because where's the population at? It's I-12 South. So once you double that size of the council seat, will our rural constituency, besides our minority, will the person be elected from Slidell and make decisions for rural constituency I don't know that they'll be able to have a real seat.
Well, when you look at that, we just went through redistricting, and I agree with everything that's said, but once again, you have to sit down in a room and figure a way to do it. And the only way you can do that is by having something in front of you and trying to work it out. It's not to say it's going to work out. I said try to work it out. If there's a way, the law mandates that you have a minority district. And I have seen minority districts from New Orleans run from Plaquemine Parish to Baton Rouge. Okay, that's where we sit today. But the bottom line is we can do it if we want to do it. But you must do it. That's the key point there. And you can figure it. Now let's go to the rule. You know, the rule, let's look at the 14 councilmen. A rural district, and I always kid my good friend Richard Tanner, he has more trees than people. Okay? So there's a way that you can do this and work it out. And you forget about rule, you forget about my district and Marty Dean's district were the fastest district in the parish. So we had to cut down and change, but everybody did. But most importantly, we're having the discussion, we're starting the discussion, and all of these things are great concepts to work on. None of them, in my opinion, are a deal breaker that I heard yet to try to work this out.
So some of you touched on this in your opening remarks, but what implications might shrinking the parish council have for council members or staff? A council of smaller size would have more constituents per member. And so would the positions need to become full-time, and would the staffing needs change from what they are now?
You know, if we're talking, let's just use the number 7 for argument's sake. First off, you're going to be reducing salary for 7 people. Secondly, we have an office building at Coop Drive where you have enough room to have full-time office. So therefore, we have 3 people, 3 ladies that do a fantastic job for 14 council members now. We can bring that in and use the funds, but more importantly, I keep saying this, it's going to be the people that make this decision. This all has to be laid out professionally and where everyone can see it and decide if that's what they want. But I think it's perfect to try to do it now as we're growing, as our revenue is coming in, and to look at it.
Great. So what do you see as the pros and cons of at-large council members? Should they be considered?
Well, here's the thing. Supposedly at-large represents the entire parish. Okay, so if you're in a district, technically, if you have an at-large, you have somebody else you can go to if you have a problem. So that's I think is an advantage to it. In the cities that have mayors, usually one of the at-large will serve as acting mayor in the absence of the mayor. In terms of places that have parish presidents, doesn't necessarily work that way. But you know, I think at-large can work, and I think what happens is that you have someone who's not just interested in the district; they're interested in the whole parish, and so I think it brings an added perspective to it. So I think you'll find in most of the growing parishes, Jefferson, for example, which I think is probably the second largest parish in the state now, you have 2 at-large and you have 5 district. Now, what that means then is you have even less districts, so you would be moving from 14 down to 5 districts if you went that direction.
I don't really have an issue against or for. I mean, I just interested in a dialogue. I think it would probably be a benefit, maybe.
So term limits of 3 consecutive 4-year terms went into effect for council members starting in January of 2020. This means, if we understand it correctly, the first election where some current council members will not be able to run again is 2031. how would term limits affect the possible timeline for implementing any changes to the council size?
I guess you want me to answer that one.
We'd love that. We'd love that. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I'm going to go back to what I said previously. It's not about the councilman. It's about representing the people. And you're absolutely correct. Term limit starts now and goes forward. That was done before I was on the council. Do I agree with it? Do I not? It's irrelevant. But the bottom line is, I think if we have a good, viable solution, if you want to run, you have to do what the people want to do. You put it together, you present it to the council, you let the people see that the council is looking at it and deciding, and then they can make the decision on whether or not they want to put it on the ballot. And if they don't, that may affect the next election. So there's pros and cons to it. But I think it needs to be done, and you have to that's just one of the collateral damage of this process. That's the way I see it.
If you move to having at-large and district, the term limit issue gets complicated. So the question becomes, if you term out as a district council person, can you run for at-large and vice versa? And that's one of the issues that came up with Jefferson Parish the last time that was taking a look at the charter. How do you really structure that? Usually a lot of people use the district spots as a stepping stone to moving to an at-large spot, and then usually an at-large moving to mayor or parish president or something like that. That's usually the trajectory. So the question becomes, do you want to stop somebody when they hit 3 terms as district and say, well, you can't run for at-large, you've got to sit out for 4 years or whatever else. So it does complicate the situation if you have at-large positions.
Rebecca, can I say, we have an at-large position right now. It's the chairman of the council. I was chairman for 3 years. Chairman Airy sitting there. You deal with all of the districts during that time. So you have that technically right now.
Well, thank you all for sharing those insights with us. We're going to transition to the Q&A portion of our program. I'm pleased that we've got a number of questions that have come in electronically through our Google form. And you can also, if you want to write any questions down, we've got BGR staff members on the periphery, and you can just hand them to them. And everybody, as you're answering, if you could just try to hold the microphone as close to your mouth as possible so we pick it up. So how would citizens become part of the commission to study this? How can citizens get involved with this issue?
I believe citizens should be involved from the very beginning. But first off, I think it needs to be looked at from the different groups in the parish on whether or not this is something that is viable. And then once you have that, the president of the parish could put a committee together, and they should be involved in it from the very beginning, and more so than the elected officials, I believe.
Becky, I believe I was trying to find that actually in the charter, the council has to put it to the vote of the people. They're the ones that have that authority. But it actually states, if I'm not, Bill, I don't know if you've read it, but I thought it said citizens could actually initiate a charter change by having voter signatures. And I think that number was 20%, but don't hold me to that.
Which would be consistent with other parishes. Usually the council by vote can put something on a ballot, a charter change, and it's usually, like Orleans, for example, takes, I think it's like 10,000 signatures to get a charter change amendment on a ballot. So yeah, the people could do it. But in terms of a commission, the last time, if you look at the front page on the charter, it was a pretty representative group that were on the commission. Most places have universities maybe nominate, or business organizations, or the chamber or other organizations nominate people to serve on the commission. And the idea is to have a representative sampling of people in the community, so you get all different voices inputting into how the process works.
Here's a really interesting question. Is the primary problem with the current system that residents are not fully being served by part-time members? Or is it that with more than a dozen council members, it's difficult to find consensus and make progress?
The citizens are being represented by the 14 members that sit there now, and I know it firsthand. And I know it very well because I am not a working person. I'm retired. So I know how much time a teacher puts in when he or she comes from school, or an attorney and comes to meetings at 5 in the afternoon and do it. The benefit of having me versus someone that is working, and it happened just yesterday. A constituent called and I answered the phone in 15 minutes. You have personal touch, or the opportunity to have personal touch and personal representation if someone is there and able to do it, rather than concentrating on their profession, which they should do. And that is a major, major issue today. But as far as the council doing their job, I can't tell you how these teachers and attorneys and business people put in to the parish, and it's amazing. So the answer is yes on that, and I'm very proud of all of them.
Now that I'm just a constituent, I mean, my council member I talk to frequently, so I find it's very easy, but it could be maybe someone else has experienced something different.
Well, I just think theoretically, if somebody's working full time, they're more available. They're not splitting their interests. So I think obviously part-time council persons can adequately do the job, but I think if someone's full time, they've got more time to do that job, and so that they don't have distractions. And I think the parishes that have been growing have moved toward full-time council members, and the compensation has been appropriate to try to attract someone, who's might give up another job to become an elected official, and so that's another consideration. How do you price the full-time job to attract people that you want on the council?
Here's another interesting one. Would a restructuring mean reducing or transferring power from the executive to the legislative branch? If so, what current areas of the executive branch power should be addressed?
I guess I'll answer that one too. The answer to that is yes and no. But more importantly, I think you can have the type of government that we have right now, administration and council, but you must have communication. You must have talking. And sometimes, no matter what business you're in, doesn't matter what profession you're in, you can have someone that will say, well, I'm this, and this works for me, or she works for me, or he works for me. And you may lose what you should not lose, the communication. And so it would help to have a full-time member there taking care of his district. It would help that he could walk down the hall, or she could walk down the hall and speak directly to the parish president or the chief administrative officer, just on the spur of the moment, rather than scheduling a meeting 2 or 3 days out. Remember, St. Tammany is growing, and St. Tammany is going to have more issues as we sit here. And I really believe that we need to have people there communicating and working together. And I think this would allow it even greater than it is today.
I tend to agree with his comments. One of the things that I think should be addressed a little bit more is the authority to consult with the administration. I think that there ought to be something written. I mean, in the existing charter, they have some authority, but I think it needs a little bit refinement, so that without getting into what's going on today, you call it communication. Your problem is you can't write that into a charter. And let's be honest, folks, that's personality. It's nothing more other than that's personalities. But I think that the council should never be told, never ever be told, you can't talk to somebody. That should never happen.
My experience has shown that once you go to full-time council members, the number of council committees increases. And so I don't think they necessarily take power away from the executive branch, but I think they increase the oversight and watchdog sort of role with respect to the executive branch. So, for example, if it was a utility issue, you might have a utility committee, you might have a committee that deals with the water board or something like that, and then it would, if you will, I won't use the word necessarily invite, but request that the executive branch, the head of a department, so I think you have economic development department here, whatever, they would request that the economic development director come and present to the council on a certain issue. And I think what you find in parishes where you have full-time, you have more committee activity by the council and more oversight over what the executive branch is doing. And I think that's where the charter has to give the legislative branch flexibility to not only just meet with the director of department, but to meet two persons at lower levels who actually have the information, who at ground zero in terms of delivering the services to the public. The problem I think councils sometimes run into is the executive says, you can't talk to my people unless you come through me. That's a problem. And I think the charter needs to make it clear that the council in its legislative and oversight functions has the power to basically interface with employees on the executive branch. Not control them, not supervise them, but be able to interface with them and get information that's necessary to affect the activities of the council.
We have several questions related to staffing, and I'll take one that looks at it from two different perspectives. While the current council member salary would be considered very low for a full-time professional position, do members often devote full-time hours to the job? On the other hand, would council members really need to be full-time if they had more staff?
Well, I haven't really looked at hiring more staff and not reducing the council, number one. But full-time, the dollar amount, as I said, that's not for me or anyone. There's people that will do that for us. But I really believe that the council, there's so much that goes on in parish government other than business about moving things forward and working and trying to get projects done for everyone, that if you have that full-time council member sitting in there, he is actually watching the project move forward from the inception to the end. That does not take place today, and that's not anyone's fault. And just so I'm on record, we have a great administrative staff. The employees work with us. They're fantastic. But once again, I'm relying on them and then getting into the project rather than being in the project from the inception to the end and watching it go through the system. It's very important that you do that. Once again, you will get, I really believe, a better form and a better parish with full-time people looking at it. No, you can't make it a $500,000 job, but there's very qualified people that are out there that want to come do it, that are interested in it, but they really just can't afford to do it on what's there now on a full-time salary.
In terms of salaries, just to give you an idea, in Jefferson Parish, the district council persons make $90,000 a year. The at-large make $100,000 a year. It's similar in Orleans Parish. I would suggest on a low end, you probably would be looking at about $60,000, and on the high end, maybe $90,000. I think that's probably the price range you're looking at. I've never seen a situation with full-time council people where eventually they didn't get their own staff with at least 2 or 3 people. So I think when you make the council person full-time, there's probably going to be them wanting full-time staff that report directly to them. So I think you're going to have a budget increase inevitably.
I tend to agree, but I think that's okay if that's what we all decide we want to do. Right. But I think we're naive if we think, well, we just have a full-time council member and not have staff. I mean, I know Orleans, I serve with all those parishes, and they have drivers, they have staff, they have personal people that handle their meetings. You know, it gets pretty expensive, but that's okay if that's what we all want to do.
Okay, so we've had several questions come in about the potential for tax increases or the cost of government, and I was going to ask the question, would reducing the size of the council change the cost of parish government at all? What might increase, what might decrease, and what would stay the same? But it sounds like all 3 of you are saying that you think that the cost of parish government would probably go up with a shift like this, but it would be, you know, hand in hand with executing what the people want if they were to vote for such a thing.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Great. Let's see. So there's also a number of questions about the process if this were to take hold. If St. Tammany were to start the process of looking at shrinking the size of the council today, how long would it take to transition? Would the charter have to be amended, reapportionment? And also, is it not uncommon for full-time councils to have an inspector general? Just also asking about, is it common for parishes to have an inspector general if there's a parish with a full-time council?
The answer is yes. Orleans has an inspector general. Jefferson Parish has an inspector general, and the tug of war is the inspector general wants to be independent of everybody and report to neither the council nor the parish president, and they usually want their funding in such a way that they don't have to go begging for money. That there's usually a dedicated millage or something for the inspector general. I don't think necessarily you have to do that initially, but over time, they may see the need to actually have, as you grow, you need a watchdog, and that's what the inspector general is supposed to do. See if there's any waste and see how do you correct that situation. How do you identify the waste and how do you correct it? So I think inevitably, as St. Tammany gets larger, and you're going to end up with an inspector general or something like that. Somebody, it may be an internal auditor, but there'll be somebody that goes in and sort of tries to ferret out if there's misspending, wrongdoing, or whatever.
I agree with Bill.
What about,
I agree with Bill also.
The question also contemplated the process and how long any sort of transition would need to take, and what are some of the steps that would be involved.
Well, it was interesting when we did. I think our meeting we started in 1998 for the Charter Commission, and it went into effect in 2000. So that just gives you some past history. But Mike may have, but I think you're going to have to give them plenty of time, because I hear what Mike's saying. What he wants is for all of us to have a voice. So to do that, you can't do that in one meeting. I mean, so you may be looking at a year. Then it would go to the council, who could then put it to the voters at a next election with a certain date when it will begin. Now, we did, in 1998, we did 2000 because that was an election year for all of the council of police sheriffs.
Well, Rebecca, I totally agree, but as I said in the beginning, by you guys getting this ball rolling, that only helps the time frame shrink, but it will take at least, I say, 4 years. That's just my, well, yes.
And Bill, are there any lessons that you think St. Tammany can learn from Jefferson's council consolidation years ago?
Yeah, I think Jefferson made great progress. I mean, you know, Jefferson right now is the second largest parish in the state. It's got a lot of activity, a lot of economic development going on. Its main task now is to get younger people to move into the parish, which I think is something a lot of parishes are taking a look at, and things that will attract younger people. And when I say younger people, I mean people, young families, et cetera, to come into the parish.
So we get rid of the old people.
Well, no. I'm probably older than you, but anyway, no. But the idea, I think, from most growing parishes is to make sure that young people and young families stay there. There's entertainment for them. They feel safe, and so as you get bigger, your problems get bigger. You know, you're just fixing the streets becomes a more difficult task. Crime increases. I don't care where you are. You know, you're going to end up with more crime. Homelessness. Orleans has a very large homeless problem going on right now, and if you ride around the convention center, you can see it's like tent city. Jefferson has a bit of a problem, but not quite as bad as Orleans. And I think Jefferson's problem is more on the east bank of Jefferson rather than the west bank of Jefferson. But in any event, as you get bigger, you have to deal with other types of problems. And one type of problem is going to be homelessness at some point. You know, people are going to flock to the parish. I mean, the climate's decent. You know, and when they flock, if they can't find affordable housing, they become homeless. So,
one last question before we wrap up. We've focused on council consolidation today, but are there other areas where the parish would benefit from streamlining or restructuring the provision of public services, such as, say, fire districts, recreation districts, things like that?
I defer to Mike on that. Well, the simplest way to say that is, I think St. Tammany Parish needs to look at everything. We have grown, we have expanded, we do a great job at what we have, but the bottom line is we need to have more citizens' participation in elections. And the only way you get that is by transparency and allowing the citizens to have a greater say in everything. So I wish we could, if I had my magic wand, I would start at everything that is on the books, because they were put on the books when we were a police jury. And as the population has grown, taxes have grown, everything has grown. But the bottom line is those are still there. They need to be looked at, maybe modified in some way, and the only way you can do that is by putting them on the ballot and let the people vote. And that's how we would get more participation in our government here in St. Tammany Parish.
Becky, yes, there certainly are. As Mike just stated, a lot of the rules and regulations were just kind of rolled over into the charter that we have today. I'll give you one example. I mean, you could talk about a lot of things. I think what Mike is saying, you just make a list of all of those and then have the dialogue. But lighting districts, you'll hear people say, why don't I have lights? You say, well, you're not in a lighting district. I have a lighting district, but you don't have a lighting district, so therefore the parish doesn't pay for your lights, street lights I'm talking about. We actually have little drainage districts that are taxed. Just the people that live in that area are taxed. Does that really make a lot of sense? I mean, you know, shouldn't we just have a lighting district for the whole parish, a drainage district for the whole parish? And there's many more. I mean, the difficult ones are, because we looked at that in my administration, consolidation. You had 13 fire departments. That's a whole different beast. You know, great people, do a great job, and can't say enough good things about them. But all of us are paying taxes for that. So there's the legal counsel. What would you do with that? So there's just a lot of things that I think would need to be looked at. And I think, Bill, on a couple of our Zoom meetings, that was one of your discussions.
I like to keep things simple. And if you look at Jefferson Parish's charter, it's pretty simple. The philosophy there is to only put in the charter what you need to put in the charter, and anything else put into ordinances, which allows more flexibility. You don't have to come back, keep amending the charter, et cetera. Orleans, on the other hand, is everything you can imagine in the charter. And as BGR knows, on a regular basis, there are proposals to amend the charter. I think there's 2 proposals coming up.
There will be 2 more this fall.
Yeah, 2 more this fall. I've had occasion to assist BGR on coming up with how to present a presentation to the voters as to, you know, pros and cons or whatever. But I'd say yes, look at everything that's in the charter and decide what needs to be in the charter and what can be basically dealt with by ordinance, and keep the charter as simple as you can. Things that you know you want etched in stone, put in the charter. Things that don't necessarily have to be, I would suggest you go put them in an ordinance, and it gives you more flexibility in terms of change.
Terrific. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Mike, Kevin, and Bill, for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks again to First Horizon. Thanks again to First Horizon for its generous sponsorship of our breakfast briefing series, including this one. And thank you to Hornbeck Offshore Services for hosting us this morning. This has been a terrific facility. And thank you to all of you for being with us this morning. A recording of today's BGR breakfast briefing will be available on our website, bgr.org. It will also be rebroadcast on WWNO, New Orleans Public Radio, on Tuesday, June 27th at 9 p.m. We hope this event has been informative and that we will see you again at future BGR events. Please don't forget to take our survey. We would love to hear from you and get suggestions or comments on this briefing. It's just scan the lower QR code here. Meanwhile, watch for a new round of research reports in the coming months, and please consider following us on social media. If you have any ideas for research reports that could better support government in St. Tammany Parish, we would love to hear from you. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again for coming.